UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has expressed concern over the national security law for Hong Kong.
We are obviously deeply concerned about the decision to pass the national security law in Beijing as it affects Hong Kong. We will be looking at the law very carefully. We will want to scrutinize it properly to understand whether it's in conflict with the joint declaration between the UK and China.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is threatening China with new countermeasures over the legislation. He says Tuesday was a sad day for Hong Kong. And just after China passed the national security law for Hong Kong, Washington announced that it was paring back its policies giving the city special trade status. There are also critical voices in Hong Kong society. Opposition activist Joshua Wong says the law marks the end of the city, and some local residents have responded by deleting their Twitter accounts and scrubbing their social media platforms. And protesters gathered in a Hong Kong shopping mall Tuesday, standing for a moment's silence following reports the law had been formally approved. So, what exactly are the provisions of a Hong Kong national security law? He's a detailed explainer.
The national security law lists 4 categories that endanger national security. It defines these as secession, subversion, terroristic activities, and collusion with a foreign country or other external elements that endangers national security. People committing the offenses could face anything from life in prison to short-term detention and other restrictions. The law applies to permanent and non-permanent residents of Hong Kong. For companies and groups who violate the national security law, they will face fines and have their operations suspended. The law states that Hong Kong's rights and freedoms, including freedom of speech and the right to demonstrate, will be protected in accordance with the law. Hong Kong SAR has jurisdiction over cases related to national security, and judges will be appointed by the city's chief executive. But for complex cases, such as those involving external forces, the central government can exercise jurisdiction. The law also states the central government will set up an office in Hong Kong to safeguard national security. The office will also oversee, guide, and provide support on issues related to national security.
Now, for more reading and also analysis of the law, we are now joined by Mr. Lawrence Ma, Chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Ma. Well, let's talk about the critics first. Critics of the legislation say the new law, the national security law, undermines independence of Hong Kong's legal system guaranteed by the basic law. How would you respond to that charge?
Well, usually what in the common law system is that judges are not appointed by the executive. That's the rule. But in this case, the chief executive has the power to designate judges. So what the chief executive has the power to do is to choose from a pool of existing judges, from a pool, including high court judges, district court judges, recorders, deputy judges, magistrates. There's a pool of existing judges. Now, the chief justice is just to designate. That means amongst this number of judges in the pool, there is this particular senior judges who can handle national security law cases. This is the power. It is not what other people said. It is not where there is a case, an ongoing existing case. Then the chief executive picks one that he likes to put him or her on the case so as, for example, to maybe obtain a favorable result. This is not the case. So the power is to designate from a pool of existing judges. This number of judges will be chosen by or would be assigned by the Chief Justice to handle cases within the judiciary.
Right, and about the specific content of the law, Zhang Xiaoming said on the press conference that according to the national security law, there will be 2 law enforcement and judicial teams from Beijing and from Hong Kong SAR as a better way of a division of work in different legal systems. How exactly does that work? Will there be any conflict of interests or even repetition of work?
Now, the vast majority of cases in Hong Kong would be investigated by local police. It would be prosecuted by local prosecutors within the Department of Justice. It would be trialed by a court of law in Hong Kong with Hong Kong judges. It possibly would involve Hong Kong people as jury if the case is not involving state secrets or sensitive information. So the vast majority of cases would be handled and will be handled by local Hong Kong law enforcement. Now, the special situation is if there are cases which the Hong Kong local enforcement, local prosecutors and local courts cannot handle, is so beyond the power, authority and scope of the local administration, then this matter will be taken over by the National Security Committee designated in Hong Kong to deal with these major cases that's beyond the ability of the Hong Kong government. And that those National Security Committee officials would have to abide by both the national law and the local law. Sorry, let me say it again. He would have to abide by the national law, not the local law. And also, this enforcement would be very rare. It has to obtain approvals from the top of the central government for enforcement or for this National Security Committee to take action, actual local action to enforce the law in Hong Kong.
Well, another thing is that the law says that inciting hatred of China's central government and the Hong Kong SAR would now be an offence. So what would fall under the definition of hatred? For instance, would the peaceful protests fall in that category?
Well, it was actually under Article 29, subsection 5, whereas anyone who provokes by unlawful means hatred among Hong Kong residents against for example, the central government or the Hong Kong government, and which is likely to cause serious consequences, would be liable under that. Now, it would be pretty difficult because I would say that you have to use unlawful means. So if a newspaper reporting certain incidences or shortcomings of the Hong Kong government, for example, it would not be using unlawful means. It would be using a lawful means, which is it is a lawful newspaper. And this is the difficulty. Any newspaper, television criticizing the government would not fall within these categories because it is not for unlawful means. And the problem also goes to whether it would likely to cause serious consequences. So if you criticize a government policy, saying it is wrong and people started to hate it, is it going to cause serious consequences? So this is something that we don't really know.
Well, indeed, how will people know if they are crossing the line if they don't know where the line is?
Well, the law, except with this particular area, where the particular area you just asked me about, the provocation by unlawful means, hatred of the government, other sections are very clear. They are so clear that any acts that is to, for example, anyone who organizes, plans, commits, or participates in acts to, for example, separatism, to cause, with a view to cause separatism, or Hong Kong independence of Hong Kong from the People's Republic of China. Those are so clear that you cannot do such an act to separate Hong Kong from the mainland China.
Right, and you mentioned just now the legislation also mentioned decisions made by the newly established will be made by the newly established National Security Committee, and that cannot be challenged in the court of law. What does that mean, and who will supervise that body then?
We're talking about the two bodies. One is the body that is set up by the mainland central government here. that is, well, in Chinese it's pretty clear, but in English, I think it is called a committee. Yes, the Committee for Safeguarding National Security. And there is another committee in Hong Kong, which is the committee headed by the chief executive. Now, that committee is a committee which is within the Hong Kong government. And I think your question goes to whether this Hong Kong committee has any power. Is that right? What I missed your question.
Who will supervise the Committee of National Security Committee,
Right,
who made all the decisions and cannot be challenged in court?
Yes. The committee that's headed by the chief executive is a Hong Kong committee which makes administrative or executive decisions. Usually, these decisions would be subject to judicial review in a court of law in Hong Kong, any administrative decisions. Any by the government, by any statutory body, would be, or public body, would be subject to judicial review in Hong Kong in a court of law. However, the national security law made it an exception. Any decisions made by this National Security Committee chair by the chief executive would not be susceptible to judicial review by a court of law in Hong Kong. So you cannot question the decision of the chief executive's committee in this regard in a court of law.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence Ma, Chairman of Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation. Thank you very much for your insight.